Greetings, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Head Above Water, a podcast about filmmaking and mental health and what it takes to find a little bit of peace and happiness in this crazy topsy-turvy business called show. Welcome to episode 8 of Head Above Water, and this week's episode is a Sundance special. We're going to be talking with Ben Wiessner, producer of the movie Beast, which had its world premiere at Sundance just last week and still has 2 screenings coming up this week. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the screenings at Sundance. So if you're listening to this today, this release week in Park City, you have 2 more chances to go see Beast at the Sundance Film Festival, and hope that you do. Ben and I have a very interesting conversation this week. I met Ben actually in Los Angeles just after the 2018 South by Southwest Film Festival, where his previous film, Thunder Road, won the Grand Jury Prize, and my film, Getting Over, was in the Documentary Spotlight category. And while I was in Austin in 2018, I met director, star, producer Jim Cummings and producer Natalie Metzger, and got to know a little bit of their team and became friends with Ben after we returned to Los Angeles. We have a real interesting chat with Ben this week. We talk about the things I usually like to talk to filmmakers about: success and failure and jealousy of other filmmakers, and just kind of wondering what your place is in this independent film community. But Ben has a very interesting perspective on it as someone who's taken the next step up in his career and worked on some bigger and better pictures. He's got a very interesting perspective on the changing meanings of success as your career continues, and helping to find a team not only to take your own work to the next level, but to also help really discover what it means to be a better storyteller. And I just think he's got a very, very special, unique perspective on the anxieties that often beset filmmakers and how he deals with those traps that can arise that can take you down when you're trying to produce your work. So stay tuned for our conversation with Ben. It's a really good chat. Also want to let you guys know that this episode is again brought to you by Upstart Film Collective. It is my production company. We do post-production services, editorial services, design services. Also, if you're an independent filmmaker and you're going to be out on the festival circuit this year and you need a DCP, please feel free to get in touch with me. I also do DCPs. I did my own DCP for Getting Over, which premiered at South by Southwest, like I said, in 2018 with not a hitch on the DCP. So I don't think you need to go to a big studio or spend a lot of money to do that. If you need a DCP or anything at all for your film as you hit the festival circuit this year, please feel free to get in touch. But without further ado, I want to get you guys into this week's conversation with Ben Wiessner, and I'll have a couple more things for you guys on the other side. But until then, enjoy our conversation with Ben. All right, greetings. Welcome to Head Above Water. I've always wanted to do this, by the way, coming to you live from the Vanishing Angle Studios in beautiful downtown Atwater Village in Los Angeles, California. We are here today with Ben Wiessner, producer of last year's Grand Jury Prize-winning film at South by Southwest, Thunder Road, the upcoming Beast, which will be premiering in Sundance, right?
That's right.
As well as lots of other movies, and we can get into all of that fun stuff. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Jason.
Awesome. So what I wanted to talk to you about so much stuff today. Anything that you want the audience to know about what you've worked on in the past? Obviously, I said Thunder Road, and you have Beast coming up, and a couple of others. So tell me a little bit about how you got started in this wonderful business of show.
Yeah. So I was living in New York right after college, basically, and I was running a literary press. And I was living with filmmakers, and I was actually driving truck for a couple $100 a day for like Beyonce music videos. And that was when like AOL Studios was doing a whole bunch of really mediocre podcasty shows. So I was doing that and just really didn't understand that I was working in film or think of myself that way, and working on these little scripts with my roommates. And all of a sudden, 2.5 years later, when we finally got the couple of $1,000s together to finish them up, they started getting into places like South by Southwest.
It's great.
And it was my second trip down there. It was 2013 when we went down with Euphonia. And I was talking with Jim Cummings, who ended up doing Thunder Road, but was producing Danny Madden's work. And I was trying to figure out how to walk into these meetings because I felt like just the roommate of these people.
Right. So you would never so you never really considered yourself a filmmaker, or you never really wanted to be a filmmaker?
Yeah, I wasn't
kind of fell
really
into
thinking
it.
about it in terms of wanting, or like that was actually what I was doing. I was spending 100 hours a week doing it at that point.
100 hours a week.
I mean, something like that
So-
between
so
like
half
driving
time.
truck full time and doing all of that. But then it dawned on me at that point that what I was doing was producing. I didn't know the word for what was happening.
Right.
So
Because nobody, I mean, sometimes in school, yeah, but like they don't say, here's your producing class, intro to producing. I mean, when I was in
Yeah.
film school, there was no intro to producing class.
and that's when we really came up with one of our catchphrases is a producer should be a verb. And that's how I
Right.
found out that I was a producer was I was doing the action of it.
So what was your main focus in school then, if this was not like your initial, or was it and you just didn't know what to call it at the time?
I have a really good poetry degree.
Okay.
So that was kind of my main focus and just thinking about the creative process in general.
Mm-hmm. And then you just kind of met up with these guys in college and said, this might be something worth pursuing.
I really loved just like the production aspect of it. I had grown up like pulling curtain for dance shows. My brother is basically a producer for dance, so I had done a lot of that kind of behind the scenes work, and I love that mentality and the feeling that you get on a set or in production. So that really appealed to me much more than something more careerist, that I just liked spending my time on sets.
So how do you view, I mean, obviously a producer has a very important role in the creative process. And I think you wrote Euphonia, right? Or you're one of the credited
yeah,
writers for it?
I helped pass a bunch of drafts back and forth.
You guys
with
just
Danny,
all kind
yeah.
of fill in as necessary and just kind of wear all the creative hats?
Yeah, more or less.
Well, let me just ask you this then. Do you have any interest, as Jim has gotten into directing and Danny and all that, do you have an interest in spreading out into more writing and directing, possibly acting, or you're just like, this is what I like to do, I want this to be my career?
Perhaps more writing and getting more involved in that early stage part of the process. But in terms of directing, like we have so many great directors on our roster. Like,
Right.
as much as I feel really passionate about the camera work and everything like that, like I don't want to be on set and thinking about what a 35 lens from this distance versus a 55 from a little further back feels like.
Well, as someone
Yeah.
who's directed him, see that doesn't like I had never picked the lens. Most of the cameras I use have built-in lenses because I can't usually afford anything more than $500 a day or something like that. So,
which is a great level of product too. Like
Oh, yeah.
we've filmed so much of our body of work over the years, multiple features with like just the Sony A7 and like a couple of old film lenses that
And that's all you
Jim
need
had picked up,
sometimes.
from just Goodwill stores for
Sure.
$30.
Yeah.
You know?
So, but you've never really felt that need then to like. I ask you this because there's a private side to one's career. Like whether you're a filmmaker or a teacher, like you go to school, you learn how to do something, and then you go and do that thing as your career. But in our business, in the entertainment industry, there's this public side to it too, where like other people will be praising you for your work or criticizing you for your work. Sports figures have to go through it as well, but teachers don't usually, plumbers don't usually. So I'm curious to talk to you about, as you felt your career advance and grow, how do you deal with those external forces that are constantly either bringing you up or pulling you down? And how do you find your center trying to deal with that? Because as I feel my career move in that same direction, I'm deeply attuned to how other people deal with that kind of stuff.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from at the baseline, you have to just not believe them. Whatever they say about your work, it's really important to focus in on what you and your team think you achieved and trying to find the audience that sees what you see with that, and not really paying as much attention to what the critics are saying or what the awards mean, because they don't mean a ton.
Right. But how do you do that is the question. In our business, just so easy to get taken away by that. How do you separate the two? How do you stay grounded?
Because one of them is reality and one of them is myth. And if you're dealing with the myth of like what makes people successful, that this award leads to this thing and then that can happen, I just don't feel like that's how it works for people. That we look back and we try and describe the success that somebody's had based on these little mile markers of awards. But in reality, it takes just like dozens of times of knocking down that door. And I think that when you have that kind of sustainability that you were talking about, it comes from just the volume of stuff that you're doing. That it didn't do very much for us for the Thunder Road short to win at Sundance.
Right. And people I don't think they'll see that on the resume and think that that's the key. There they are. They're going to, that's opening the door.
That's when we got into the dark cave, and
right.
That's when we got all of the secrets, and that's when all of this stuff happened.
Right.
But no, we went right into production on 6 more one-shot short films, and it was working with those cinematographers. It was working with production designer that we really love. It was doing all of this stuff of team building. That was the first thing we worked on with Natalie Metzger, who's now just like an incredibly valuable, just intrinsic part of our team.
Sure.
But it was that process of going through those short films. And even then, like, even though those were successful, even though one of them did show at Sundance and South by, and the series itself had a really neat run. It ended up with Filmstruck. It ended up all of these places. That got us, like, say, 2 inches forward career-wise, but it made
inches,
us...
not 2 yards forward, 2 inches.
Yeah, but it moved us so far along in terms of where we were as a team.
Right.
We were so much better as filmmakers up and down the roster because we went through that process.
That's great. And actually, that kind of reminds me of a saying that I had heard. There's this basketball player on the Nets. His name is Spencer Dinwiddie, and he was having like an Ask Me Anything on Twitter, I don't know, a few months ago. And this is actually, it's a Bible quote, and I don't remember the verse, but he had said something that iron sharpens iron. When you have, your own abilities and something to bring to the table, and you get to work with other incredible people that also have their own special talents and something to bring to the table, it just kind of elevates everybody's work to a different place that, on your own, you would never really be able to accomplish. Even though you say it is 2 inches, it kind of goes back to, the reality versus the myth. Other people see it and are motivated by it because they see these 2 inches to you as like leaps.
Yeah, we talk about it as top and bottom teeth, how they sharpen each other.
Sure.
But like Spencer Dinwiddie's perfect type of example of like, that's a 2nd round pick. He was cut a couple of times.
And you know who Spencer Dinwiddie is. Welcome to our NBA podcast.
And now he's going to be an all-star this
Absolutely.
year. And it's because he had this mentality of, I'm not a finished product.
Right.
Like, he's somebody who was continually adding to his game, taking advantage of the people who were so talented around him that could make him better. And I think that's so important. Like, when people see, okay, Thunder Road, the feature, wins the grand jury at South by Southwest, they think, oh, okay, so then
right.
that helps a film like Beast get into Sundance. But in fact, it was that night we had a short film, Krista, that Beast is based off of, and that film won a couple of awards at South by Southwest as well. But we didn't celebrate. What we did is celebrate the way our team does, which is we went back to the house we were all staying at, and we ran a Kickstarter. We stayed up
right back to work that very night.
That night, we stayed up all night to launch a Kickstarter, to launch the Krista short the next day. And that's how we were able to get into production as quickly as possible on Beast.
That's great.
Those awards were the 2 inches, and then it's figuring out what you can do.
So you guys have kind of come to the, maybe not the realization, but the decision, or, whatever kind of word you want to put on it, that the way to not let the myth side, as you say, the myth side of our business seep its ugly face into your head is to just keep making things consistently, constantly. And when you stay on that the reality side of it, that's what you guys use to push all the other external forces, all that other stuff out of your head.
Yeah, and that because it's what you can control. It's what you can work on to actually be much better as a filmmaker when that opportunity maybe does swoop out of the air and pick you up and like bring you to new heights.
It's great.
But until you have that moment where somebody's out there offering you $30 million to make a film and you can do whatever you want with it, like really figuring
out 30 million movies for $30 million.
I know, but those are the things that do end up in the Oscars and everything like that. Even the smaller independent stuff still has real money behind it when it gets to that level.
Sure.
So how do you figure out what you're going to do if you do have that opportunity? And I think it's just through this vicious cycle of repetition, working on yourself, working on your stories, working on how your films actually hit audiences. And I think really one of the things that's helped us over the years is like the amount of things that we've released and the amount of times we've tried to really get creative about finding audiences has been a big part of that success journey as well.
Sure. But like Uncut Gems, for instance, everyone's heaping so much praise on this picture that on some level, part of me is like, well, I know I can do what they do when I know I can't, because they're Josh and Benny, and they deserve all the accolades that they do get.
And it's not their first feature.
It's not their
multiple features in, and that's
they're well over 10 years into their career as directors. But it just, it gets very frustrating, at least is the word for me, when I just see so much praise being heaped on things while I know that I'm busting my ass so hard just to get someone interested in one of my projects. And I like to do a lot of my stuff, not on my own per se, but I like to keep them small. I don't like to do, bigger things. My movie Getting Over was, a small team of maybe 7 people. Even though you've said that you're able to separate the reality and the myth, is there ever a little voice that sneaks into your head that says, hey, don't you wish A24 had bought Thunder Road? Anything that just said like that can't just accept and appreciate the success that you've had as part of the journey of one's career?
I think if anybody else had released Thunder Road, even if it were a bigger success, it would have been less meaningful to us. The amount that we learned from that process, the amount of people that we now know. I was writing back and forth with like a programmer today who's putting together stuff, and they're just like so excited to bring us back to Winchester, Virginia. And I know all of our films, we can pack 150 people into a theater in Winchester, and it's going to feel like a family reunion. It's going to be a beautiful experience. In terms of the bigger picture of like other people's successes versus your own, I look at somebody like the Safdie brothers and like, it's so cool.
It is great. Cool. I don't want to sound like I'm resentful, because it's not resent. It's just when we try to break in and we spend years trying to break in. And again, like the Safdies have been making movies for 10 years.
And small movies. They made a lot of small stuff with the same type of crew, all of that. Like they were really building those muscles up. So that feels like more like towards the inspiration side. I think it's important to get off of other people's timelines in a certain way, though. I think that's a real disservice that we do to ourselves. And I think that's what helps you be able to celebrate people. Like I look at I call it our draft class of like the people who came in to the 25 New Faces of Indie Film in 2012 with us.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too, because there's got to be some level of, now you have to live up to that.
And the list is crazy. It's like Ryan
Coogler was on that. I looked at it last night because I wanted to see what else was on there.
But then there's like these amazing other filmmakers like Terrence Nance and Desiree Akhavan and Penny Lane and Patrick Wang, who've just been kind of constantly churning out all this amazing work over and over and over again. And that's so inspiring, that knowing the journey of someone like Desiree, who's going through a web series, a first feature, and then the second feature really hits and has that opportunity to get that shine at Sundance, where her first feature had been, but then to like win the grand jury prize there and to have these different like opportunities. And I know for so many of us, even as golden of situation as that feels like, that's not what it feels like to be in that situation.
Right.
You still feel like it can
Sure.
be taken away at any point. Like you haven't gotten, there's no sense of security from that stuff.
Right. And that's what I found when I speak to other filmmakers about it too. And, like I said, it's hard to separate and not compare your journey to other people's journey. And then the one thing that I really had never kind of realized, again, as someone who had kind of been working in post for 20 years, and my career was my job, like I wasn't like a filmmaker. Like, I mean, I had little projects that I would shoot with my friends and, shoot on my own or whatever, and little experimental things. But the one thing that I always thought that like happiness was the destination. If I do this, and this, and then my movie gets appreciated or accepted by, a distributor or a festival or whatever, then I will be happy. And I think a lot of young filmmakers, again, it's not to posit my feelings on other people, but I get the sense from talking to other young filmmakers, now that I'm more involved in the community, that it's really hard for people to define success on their own terms and not by comparing themselves to anyone else's journey.
Yeah, but then you're never going to be successful.
And you'll never be happy.
There's not enough ever there if you continue to base it on these external things. We had in our Ornana office back in like 2011, 2012, as we're working on Euphonia, which is like maybe $3,000 worth of peanut butter and jelly, but got to play at South by Southwest and got to really bring us into a new world. And there were two quotes back to the NBA podcast. There was, I had an old jersey from Bill Russell, and underneath it put his quote, "Success is the journey." And that's somebody who won nothing but championships, won like 11 NBA championships, won a couple of NCAA championships, did nothing basically but win. But he's also known as the best team player in the sport, or in more or less any sport. That his whole focus was on like practice, being there, consistency, doing this thing with this team that had this incredible level of success, in large part because their best player wasn't an asshole. Like he could have been shooting more, could have been doing this, that, or the other thing more. And then the other quote is from a Portuguese poet, and it translates basically to, "Wanderer, there is no path. The path is made by walking." And those were kind of the two things that were our tenets going all the way through. This is what we're doing. The next 30 years are just going to be about figuring out how to create a path. And one of our focuses has turned into, now that we do have, like, again, that tiny measure of success.
Right.
We're not generally successful.
Right.
The Safdies aren't jealous of us. But what that looking at the path has been really trying to figure out a way to make that sustainable for us to go down, but then also create a path forward for more and more other filmmakers. Like, that's why we want to figure out what we can do in terms of like fundraising differently. What we're doing with WeFunder and crowd equity stuff is something that we feel really passionately can change how indie films are financed. In like basically a week, we were able to raise $350,000 for beta tests.
It's great.
And we wouldn't have been able to do that if an A24 had picked up Thunder Road.
Right, sure.
We were able to tell a very different story and have it not rely on anybody else's measures of success. We could talk to investors and say, hey, this is what we're able to do with the film. We're fundraising what we would need to do to put it out into theaters on our own. And it just takes away the power of yes or no from a lot of these different people. It becomes those conversations with distributors who we have really good relationships with. It can be really about like, is this a film that we partner on? It can be
because
that
can
simple.
change. That can change project by project. It doesn't necessarily have to be we're going to make movies for you guys, from now until the end of time.
Or we're not necessarily going to have to self-distribute all of our own stuff.
Right.
But then you can really think about and talk about what that partnership looks like and what the goals of that partnership are when we know we can get ourselves into these other places.
Sure.
We have the support network that we've built.
That's great. Well, let me ask you a little bit then about the fundraising, because again, that's also that's always been a very big interest of mine, and I've said it on this show before. And I've spoken to a lot of young filmmakers about Kickstarter and crowdfunding and the state of crowdfunding today. Because when I had my Kickstarter, I had an Indiegogo too for my film, but it was back in 2012 and 2015, and even now at the end of 2019, going into 2020, the landscape's really changed significantly for fundraising. And Seed and Spark has come roaring from almost out of nowhere. I don't even think I would do a Kickstarter next time. I think I would go with Seed and Spark just because I like their focus on filmmakers and things like that. But you guys did a whole different thing, the equity crowdfunding for beta test. And that's so just give me a quick rundown on exactly what that is and how it's different from regular crowdfunding, because I'm going to have a couple questions based off of that. So I kind of want the audience to know exactly, because it's kind of new, what that kind of fundraising is all about.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of our journey with that as well, like we've been running Kickstarters since 2012. We probably have like a dozen of them that have all been successfully funded. And that was such a great way for us to really figure out how to tell the story of ourselves alongside how to tell the story of the film.
So people get involved and motivated not only by the project itself, but by the team involved in working with it.
Right. And a film like Beast, I think was probably 30 or 40% finance, not from the Kickstarter, but from people who had given like $50 to Kickstarters back to 2012. Mm-hmm. People who had come in, gotten interested in what we were doing at these very small levels, and 5 or 6 projects in, they're able to really help bolster a budget. So that's part of the journey that we were already on with that, where Beast, we put together a large chunk from these people who were Kickstarters. And then we switched over to crowd equity. We had, so basically instead of getting like a signed poster for $100, you get a small chunk of the film. And we were really interested in that because one of the things that we basically get asked 2 questions all the time from people. It's how do you fund movies and how do you get your movies seen? Mm-hmm. And so we've been really working over the last several years on what would be a non-traditional, more reliable path to do that, rather than waiting on somebody in New York or LA to say yes to either of those propositions. And so the crowd equity I think we had 370 different funders, and they came in from over 30 countries, over 35 states. And those are all people who actually own the film. And I think that's a neat advantage to it as well, is that's a free street team. Like those people all have a real stake.
Their own financial success will be based on how much they can help you guys pimp it out.
Yeah. And I think it's attractive for people on the outside to say, well, yeah, but that's Jim, and so that's different. Mm-hmm. But then we're doing the same thing right now. We're 2 weeks into a campaign for a film, See You Then. And we are basically right at the edge of everything that we need for production itself. And now we're getting to move into that level where we're raising for post-production. We're raising for the marketing spend and all of those types of things. But it's just a much different feeling when you're looking for $1,000 from somebody. That was our average, was less than $1,000 for the investments for beta test,
as opposed to like a $20 Kickstarter and maybe you get a Blu-ray.
Right. Maybe you get a Blu-ray, but also like you're gonna get that Blu-ray like 2.5 years later.
Right.
Like it's tough filling out those rewards.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about that, because there is also, again, not just the anxiety of being a filmmaker, but when you're crowdfunding, there is, at least for me and a few people that I've spoken to too, there's a pressure, and that's why I'm really curious about the equity crowdfunding, because if it's somebody that's giving you guys $10 for a Thunder Road poster, hey, you'll be done with it when you're done with it. They're going to get their poster, and that's what it is. But now you have actual investors. It's one of the reasons why I don't like necessarily chasing down investors, because now not only am I indebted to you for the poster and the movie that I want to deliver, but now I got to get you some of your money back too. Now you're going to be thinking that you're going to make money on this. And we both know making money in motion pictures is really the most difficult part out of all of it, So did you guys feel, you personally or Jim or anybody else involved, any kind of additional pressure to, now these people are not only coming to you wanting to see your next picture, they're wanting a return on their investment. So now you're playing with people's pocketbooks, and that's got to be a little extra weight on your back as you guys are moving forward with things.
Yeah, but I think that's great for filmmakers. Like
so you don't mind the pressure. You use it as fuel.
Yeah, well, and especially like it is different when you're bringing somebody along the journey as a non-traditional film investor. Like there's so much more enthusiasm that you get back throughout that process when you're showing them like a 1.5-minute little clip 6 months after production, and they see this thing come to life that they've been supporting. That feels really good to them, and they give that energy back, and it makes it a lot easier to go back into the edit and keep making this film better and better for those people.
So you use it more as creative fuel rather than like a debilitating weight on your back that like you now have to deliver something for somebody above and beyond just the film itself. Now, like, so you haven't had anyone come to you and be like, when am I going to get my 125%? No one's giving you money to make money is basically my question. Or there's got to be a couple of people that think that.
I think there are people who are, but also like we're really trying to be transparent about like how this happens. Well, honestly, for our films, the biggest chunk of where we're going to be able to make serious money is going to be overseas, and that's going to take a little while. That's not something that's going to be immediate. Even if a film does get into Sundance, that doesn't mean you just get to recoup. Sure. Like there's still a billion things that can go wrong with your film from there. But that's why we try and figure out how to have these partnerships in multiple countries where we do have some ability to really prove it.
Great.
That like there's this feeling, I think, from some people that like, oh, the Thunder Road release in France was like this crazy success, and like, is that repeatable? But we had a couple of other, that was like film 5 or 6 that had been in theaters in France in the last like 3 years from our company. Most every one of them had done at least 35,000 tickets. And so this one doubled that. It wasn't like getting there from nowhere.
Right. And again,
we already had that support.
Yeah, I don't think that's what people see is all of that stuff that goes on behind the scenes. It's not, doesn't take place in a vacuum. You don't just send out a tweet that we sold tickets, we sold our picture to a territory, in international territory, and you're like, oh, well, it's just that easy. Like you guys were hustling it the whole time.
Yeah, and almost every territory that we sold Thunder Road in was a place that we had a major festival premiere in. And that's one of those things that people come to us and they're looking for the key to success. And I think a lot of it is, it's just the same way with production, where pre-production's half of it.
Sure.
That's how the film's going to work, is if it's really thoroughly thought out. And that's going to be the same with your release. We really felt strongly about what our French numbers were going to be able to be. So we put all of our other international premieres for the UK, for Greece, for this country and that country into a 2-month window right behind when we had our French numbers. So it became a lot easier for us to be selling these territories because we had numbers. That was one of our carrots. We had the proof that it was going to happen. And then we had a premiere so that they could have a moment to really think about and announce. And it was like putting as many of these little things together at the same time and trying to have a bigger conversation than a film our size should have. And that didn't happen just from the luck of it. It was really
you guys put in that work to figure out what the best strategy would be.
In that work on multiple other films where
you saw what worked and what didn't work, and you put that. This is what I think is a bit of the disconnect, and this is what really interests me, is the disconnect between, there are young indie filmmakers out there that, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about not having a path, because for me, I've always likened it to the 405 freeway. you can take any of those lanes, but it'll still get you to where you're going. And I think a lot of young indie filmmakers today kind of think, I need to direct a picture and then somebody will see it and then somebody will give me more money to go direct another movie in the future. And that's certainly not my path, and I'm totally fine with that. But I've met a lot of people along the way that think that that is the path. And one of the things that impresses me about what you guys are doing, and this kind of mitigates all of the other mental and emotional stresses and anguish that a lot of new filmmakers put themselves through, is you guys are handling it like a genuine studio. You're not just having a Kickstarter, getting your money, making your picture, and you're not just building your MailChimp list. You're treating the actual work as an actual studio with an assembly line mentality. And that kind of blocks out all that other external garbage that would usually enter someone's mind when they think that the only way to be successful is I need to direct a picture that gets into Sundance. If you can see that success as being the work itself and learning about how the business works from that end, that could be something that makes, this young director that might be out there right now that's sitting at home feeling down, thinking that I need to direct a movie to be successful. Well, you can also do all these other things, learn more about the business, practice all of those skills. I get the sense from a lot of folks that I've been talking to that they see only one path to success. And that's when the anxiety starts to seep in. So when you guys do it the way you guys have been doing it, building not just the projects themselves, but building this foundation as a company, as a team that can kind of serve as a bit of a wall in between the myth of it and the reality of it.
And I think that's true. And I think there's a lot of ways to replicate that, though, of like figuring out how to continually be putting things out. They don't all have to be features.
Right.
And
doing a podcast.
Yeah, doing a podcast, being really thoughtful on medium, doing whatever it is. Like I think short films are the mentality we approach them with can be so wrong-headed as a means to an end only, and that you're kind of like stepping down to create a short. And it's like, oh, that's not what real filmmakers do.
Right.
But I think just like
that's also a prevalent mentality. Yeah. You're right.
Getting to know your audience in that way, I think is so helpful. Like, first off, if it does have some of those successes with film festivals, those things do matter later on when you're coming back with features. But even if it doesn't, learning how to get things online and to people is really important. Where Vanishing Angle adjacent stuff probably has like over 20 Vimeo staff picks at this point. And having that support and that growing audience is a really important thing. But then it's also about like not necessarily relying on just that part of the infrastructure.
Right.
We had a short film called Parent Teacher, which it's like a 18-minute.
It's hilarious. It's
one
cut,
one shot of this. It's a teacher melting down into parent-teacher conference, and didn't really have any festival play. We sent it to the wonderful people at Vimeo and the people at Short of the Week, and it just like wasn't their flavor. It wasn't as cinematic as a lot of our other work, including other work from that series. So they wanted to get behind the other pieces, but we really felt like, well, this should speak to people. We think that this is of a moment right now in the American education system. So we decided to really figure out what to do with it. And we took like a 30-second clip of it, turned it into a GIF, put that on Imgur, and the day it released, we had that going. And that clip, which had a lot of the heart and a lot of the jokes and a lot of the message of our short film behind it, that got over a couple million views in the afternoon. And in the week, that short film got 250,000 views from this audience that had nothing to do with film. They weren't watching it because it was a short film. It happened to be a short film. We went to a really wonderful website, Board Teacher, and they put it up and they got a whole bunch of people really behind it because that's who the film really was for.
Right.
It was for people who had these frustrations personally.
Knowing your audience.
And we think of film in this way that we talk about it as like a language, as this thing, but almost always we talk about that for filmmakers as we're the only people who get to speak this language.
Yeah, exactly.
But the language is so important for that person who sees it, and then they can share their frustration. They can share what they feel on a daily basis with their partner, with their friends, with their parents, with whoever.
Sure.
Like it gives them a tool. And I think the more of these opportunities you take to really recognize how people can use your films, what they mean to these audience members, I think it just makes your work so much stronger because you're paying attention in a much different way. You're not just paying attention to your voice, you're paying attention to what it means.
But yeah, I just think it helps just give another skill in the toolmaker's toolbox, as well as, again, put up a little bit of a wall from that outside myth area and keeps you focused on your own task at hand and what you're really trying to do with one's own career in the business.
And it's how every other creative approaches it.
Right.
You don't go as a stand-up comic and have the same exact set in Omaha as you do in New York City.
Sure.
And if you're just sitting there and you're just building these reps up in New York City, you're going to have too small of a view on what funny is and what works in your material. I think it's so important for people to go out there and see their films with audiences all over the country, all over the world as much as possible, to really figure out who watches this stuff. Right. How do we get to them? And the idea that that's not part of being an artist and that's not part of what your job as a filmmaker is, I think that's one of the things that really holds back independent film. Is not that people aren't willing to do the work, but they look at what that work is and they feel like it muddies something. Mm-hmm. Like it's not what you should do.
Like if I want to be a high and mighty artist, I need to not necessarily focus on that business aspect of it.
Right. To be an auteur.
Right.
But it's like, well, no, that's what being an auteur is it's knowing. It's knowing what the context you're putting this piece out into is, knowing what the culture around it is, knowing who it can speak to and why it matters to them, knowing what their journey is. It's about the audience. That's any storyteller's job.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let me just ask you a couple of personal questions, and before I let you go. So one of the things that you had said earlier on is you guys are just really prolific right now. You're all about just turning around. You said you had like 6 pictures in some form of production, pre-production, post-production. What do you personally do to decompress? Because whether or not there's any external pressures or stress or anxiety involved, working on 6 pictures at one time is still a lot of work, and that's got to be very exhausting for you.
Reading really helps for me. That's some place where my brain feels like it can get fuel back. Just to sit and spend a couple hours reading a novel or a book of poetry or anything like that, I feel like I'm giving my brain something to do. I'm not just burning down the same highways all the time, giving myself that opportunity to kind of think through other people's eyes. In terms of other things, I mean, I think having people around you that you really care about is a huge part of that process. I don't think we could be doing the amount of work that we're doing together if I didn't love my coworkers, if Jim and Danny and Natalie and Matt and even like our production designer's been on like 6 or 7 features. He and I have slept in the same bedroom in like 4 states in the last like year and a half.
It's a very bonding experience.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah. So it's those things are so important to keep you ready to go, because you're not doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for your career. You're not doing it for these other things. You're doing it because you're in it with these people who you want to give your best to. Yeah.
Do you then think, do you think you would never produce for other people, or, if a studio came calling and said, we want just you, Ben, and we don't want Jim or Danny, we just want you to produce this movie. Obviously it would, depend on the project, but are you generally not looking to do that with your career? You want to work with these guys from now until forever?
I think we're growing broader and broader so we have 3 features in post-production with Jim and Danny, but then there's 3 films that I EP'd as well. And trying to get more and more people into that realm where I can be really helpful. I can give whatever expertise I do have and help give them some of the steps down the path that we have. But yeah, I'd love to work with filmmakers that are just it's this opportunity to tell new and different stories. There's so many stories that are really about what the director brings, and I want to be able to work with as many different people as possible. But no, if a studio comes to me with a really mediocre idea and a lot of money, that doesn't matter very much. It's not a trade that I'm willing to make.
We're very lucky in this business to have the opportunity to work with people that are like-minded and have their perspective inform our work and things like that. And on some level, money is great. It's a career. I want to be able to support myself. You want to be able to support yourself. But there is something more worthy to attain.
Yeah, and I think that sort of love for it is what really informs the films. And I think it shows up on screen. And I think it is important to audiences. And money is very real. I'm not saying we can exist without it.
I can't give a Blu-ray of my movie to the I can't pay my mortgage with Blu-rays.
Right. And I'm wearing a TNT Fireworks t-shirt, and I spent 2 or 3 summers ago, I spent 3 weeks making a pretty good chunk of change selling fireworks in a Bojangles parking lot, and it helped me to be able to focus on what I needed to be doing. This is in that wheelhouse of when Thunder Road was being made, when all of these different things were happening. And it allowed me to take these creative risks because I had a chunk of change in my pocket from something I was willing to do.
Sure.
Because it was a 3-week time commitment. It wasn't something that took the next 9 months of my life and put me behind in a situation where I was going to miss out on a project or 2. It was a really important thing for me to be able to go down to Austin and not earn very much money for 3 months, but figuring out ways to do it so that opportunity cost is as low as possible. That when you're selling yourself for your body, your services, I just needed to count change and be able to lift boxes, basically.
And that's a sacrifice you were willing to make because you were having the freedom to pursue these other opportunities.
And they could be what they were because everybody who was coming to them was coming to them with such a level of love for the project and such a level of commitment to
iron
craft.
Sharpens iron.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron. And yes, there's going to be a lot of points in your life that you need money, and been through that.
Yeah.
But
and we'll be through that again.
Oh, absolutely. But it is figuring out how much time you're giving up for that money because the time's not coming back.
That's true. That's absolutely true. That's a great point. All right. Well, let me wrap up with just one last question. And it sounds like you've answered it already, but would you say you're happy? Are you happy doing what you're doing? Do you feel you kind of just answered if you're missing out on that, but do you feel happy in general in your life? Do you feel like you're exactly where you want to be doing what you want to be doing? Or did I just throw you a curveball?
Am I happy? Yeah, I think.
And if not, why?
Well, I think happiness is such a result of expectation, that it isn't this ideal that exists on its own, but it is really just a function of the way that we think about ourselves, how gentle we are with ourselves, what we put our value into. So I feel incredibly satisfied with what I'm able to be doing, what I'm able to be giving. I feel like my brain and my body are going to a really full use right now. But at the same time, you can sit there and you can dwell on all of the time that you don't have, the opportunities you missed out on to just like relax or like have a family or this or that or the other thing. But yeah, I think I'm happy because I focus on what is in my hands and what is around me and the people that I can support and who can support me. So I feel very satisfied by all of that. And God, you're going to be so unhappy if you just focus on everything that you don't
have any control over.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it's one of the things that I struggle with on a daily basis. But realizing that the happiness comes from the process. I used to think that it was a goal. I honestly thought, when I was making Getting Over and we got into South by, I thought that was going to bring me happiness in my career. Being in post for 20 years and always wanting to take that chance to direct a picture, a personal picture. I'm happy that I did that. But at the time, I thought that would be my entrance into, I would open the door and you walk through it and you're in happy. And it really actually ended up sending me into a depression for a year. I remember when I came here, I think the first time we ever had lunch, I was chock full of ideas and just on cloud nine and ready to go. And then when I would sit down at the computer and have to start just really doing it, my heart wasn't there. It really, and it kind of set me back a couple of steps because I had to not just work on the projects themselves, but realize, what do I really want from this? Do I, and I don't necessarily want to be a director. I'd like to do it again. I'm planning on doing it again. So it really gave me the opportunity, being depressed, gave me the time and the opportunity to really figure out what I wanted to do. It's when I had the idea to maybe pursue the podcast and speak to other people, because I found a lot of other people did feel the same way. And I don't want people to go on Twitter and think that happiness is selling your movie to A24 or happiness is being nominated for a Spirit Award. That comes from that process of working through things, and that happiness is not necessarily the goal. It is the journey. So that's why I'm really excited to hear your perspective on everything. That's why I'm real excited, to hear about what you guys have on tap. And that's why I'm also excited to, just get different perspectives on people's experiences in this business. Because the more voices, the better.
The inadequacy thing is it's so coached in. It's such a trap.
And so easy to fall into that trap.
Of course.
Even if you try not to.
Every day you're going to fall into some of those traps, but you can't have it all. You don't get to have the kid and the house and the career and the this and the that. And even if you did, you feel like you don't have time for any of those things or whatever it is. I think it's really important to just keep focused on what it is you want to be doing and put your time and your energy and your thought into that. I remember being in high school and my mother overheard me saying to somebody I wanted to be a writer. And she pulled me aside later and she goes, "Well, you write 2 or 3 hours a day. Why do you want to be a writer?"
Sounds like you are a writer.
Right. Like you're constantly writing. Mm-hmm. And that was something that really changed how I felt about myself and how I looked at myself, that because I was doing the act, that made me into this thing. To be a filmmaker is to be spending the time really making films. The same way a weightlifter is defined by the fact that they go in and they lift weights. Mm-hmm. You can't just want to be a weightlifter. You have to be doing that. But to go back, and the final thing I'd say is, it sank into me in a different way. This thing that we've come back to a couple of times of success is the journey. That night at South by, when we had 3 of the belt buckles, and it was this big moment for celebration. Joey Alley, who's a wonderful director, she came up to me and gave me a big hug and said congratulations and asked, how does it feel? And my immediate response was almost as good as being on set. And that's the thing. That was this like kind of jarring thing that came out of my mouth. So it made that decision very easy to stay up all night, to run that Kickstarter, to release that film,
back on set
because I wanted to be back on set. And this was the way that we could turn this little 2 inches forward of success and make it into an opportunity for ourselves to be back on set, to be creating again. And the film wouldn't be at Sundance if we hadn't done it that night.
And how many times have you been on set since that night?
I'd say like 12, 14 months out of the like
almost
18.
2 years. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
And that's where the happiness comes from for you.
Yeah.
That's where you feel most at home.
That's where the purpose is.
That's great. That's great. Ben, thank you so much for joining us on Head Above Water, where we're just, as independent filmmakers, you're juggling all these things, and man, we are just trying to keep our head above water and just trying to make it work any way we can. So it's really good to hear your perspective on things, and I congratulate you and your whole team on all your success and all the success yet to come and all the work that will take to get there. And again, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you guys on again real soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
And there you have it, our conversation with producer Ben Wiessner. Hope you guys enjoyed our chat. He does have a very unique perspective on what it's like being a producer and a filmmaker in the entertainment industry. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Also, feel free to check us out on buymeacoffee.com. We need to stay very caffeinated to keep bringing you these episodes with some of today's best young, hot, independent filmmakers. So if you want to keep us awake and making shows to entertain you guys, please check out buymeacoffee.com/headabovewater. Buy Me a Coffee helps support the show, and we really appreciate that. And as always, all the music that you hear on today's show and every Head Above Water episode is written and composed by Jason David White, who is also my composer on Getting Over. So if you need music for your podcast, your TV show, your movie, your rock and roll album, or anything that you might need tunes for, please look up Jason on SoundCloud at jasondavidwhite.com. Thanks again for listening to Head Above Water. This was our Sundance special with Ben Wiessner. Love to hear your comments and reviews and your ratings, so feel free to drop us a line on whatever platform of choice that you listen to your podcasts on. We'll be back with more conversations with some of today's best young independent filmmakers, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.